scary story. What could be scarier than a lone figure in bandages soaking wet in the rain on your doorstep in the middle of the night? Two friends soon find out the answer when they decide to let a stranger into their home. In Karina's old house, Karina and Tanya sat comfortably on the sofa, under a single blanket. 2 large mugs of cocoa steamed on the table in front of them, and some simple comedy was playing on the TV. They barely watched it, captivated by the conversation and the cozy atmosphere. The weather raging outside. "Can you imagine? He told me so. You're sweet, of course, but too predictable." Karina rolled her eyes dramatically, sipping her cocoa. "Predictable. That's after I surprised him with a trip out of town." Tanya snorted, wrapping herself in the blanket. "Karina, you know Max. He's like last year's snow. White, but no joy. Forget him. Better yet, tell me how your project at work is going." "Oh, it's a shambles. Don't ask." Karina waved him off. "Let's watch another movie. Something like that." She smiled. "Maybe a horror movie?" Tanya winced. "Karina, how scary it is in this weather. So, there's something special outside. You should at least write a script. Better yet, something kind." "Well, Tanya," Karina drawled. "Well, please. I just downloaded one. They say it's really scary." She didn't have time to finish. A loud, insistent knock on the door interrupted her mid-sentence. The friends froze, exchanging glances. "Who could it be at this hour, in this weather?" Tanya asked in a whisper. Karina's house was a bit isolated, and random guests rarely wandered in, especially during a storm. "I don't know," Karina answered in a whisper, slowly getting up from the sofa. "Maybe someone needs help. The car broke down or something?" The knock came again. This time it was even louder, almost demanding. Karina shuddered, but went into the hallway. Tanya followed her, keeping a little distance. "Who's there?" Karina called out. Approaching the massive door, silence answered, through which only the blowing wind and the patter of rain penetrated. "Strange," Karina muttered, looking uncertainly at Tanya. Maybe she imagined it? But then there was a third knock. 3 measured heavy blows that made the door vibrate slightly. "There's definitely someone there," Tanya said. Her voice wavered. "Karine, maybe we shouldn't open the door. We'll call someone." "Who?" Karina shrugged. "Her parents are at the dacha. There's barely any reception there. Calling Max was the last thing she needed. And what would we say if someone was knocking? Okay. I'll look through the peephole." The girl pressed her face to the peephole. Tanya froze tensely behind her. Karina was silent for a moment, peering into the distorted image. Then she slowly pulled away. Her face was pale. "Well, what's there?" Tanya couldn't resist. "There's a man there," Karina said quietly. "A man, all covered in bandages." "Covered in bandages?" Tanya frowned in disbelief. "What do you mean? Like a mummy?" "Yeah." Karina nodded. "His head is wrapped up. You can't see his face. Only a slit for his eyes, I think. And his hands are wrapped up too. And his clothes are all wet. Dark. He's just standing there in the rain." "Oh my God, Karina. This is a joke. Don't open the door. Who knows who it is? It could be an escaped lunatic. Or someone in an accident. Or a fire." Karina objected, although her voice sounded uncertain. "He needs help. We can't just leave him there. It's pouring like this." "Why not? We absolutely can. This is our home. Our safety." Tanya grabbed Karina's hand. "Please, don't." There was another knock outside, this time quieter, almost pleading. Karina bit her lip, struggling with fear and compassion. The image of a lone figure, drenched in the rain, ran up to her, albeit frightening, evoked pity. "I'll just ask what he wants through the door," Karina decided. She pressed herself against the door again. "What do you need? Do you need help?" A dull gurgling sound was heard from outside, like someone trying to speak through a thick layer of fabric. It was impossible to make out the words. Then silence again, broken by the extra weather. "He said something, but I didn't understand." Karina turned to Tanya. "Maybe he's injured, can't speak, or doesn't want to," Tanya suggested gloomily. "Karine, this is a bad idea. A very bad one." But Karina had already made up her mind. "I'll just open the chain. Just have a look. If anything happens, I'll close it right away." Ignoring Tanya's objections, she slid the chain over her shoulder with trembling hands, and slowly, creaking, opened the heavy door a couple of centimeters. Cold, damp air, smelling of rain, rushed in through the gap, and through this gap, part of a figure appeared. Indeed, the man was completely wrapped in dirty and damp bandages. Only a narrow dark slit was visible at eye level, but the eyes themselves were invisible. There was only darkness. Streams of water trickled from the bandages onto the dark wood of the porch. The figure stood absolutely motionless. "What? What do you need?" Karina asked again. Her voice trembled. The figure slowly, brokenly with great effort, raised its bandaged hand, and pointed somewhere toward the road, then at itself, and then folded its hands in a pleading gesture. At this, the same indistinct sound was heard again. It seemed he was indicating that something was wrong with his car, and asking for help. Karina translated uncertainly for Tanya, without taking her eyes off Chalia. Karine closed the door. Tanya hissed, "Please. I have a really bad feeling about this, but he's asking for help." Karina hesitated. "Maybe we should just call 911. What if he doesn't want 911? If he..." At that moment, the figure behind the door made a sharp movement, a short jerk forward, causing the chain to tighten and jingle pitifully. Both girls screamed and recoiled. Karina slammed the door and frantically slid the bolt. Both their hearts were pounding like crazy. They stood in the dark hallway listening. Outside, silence, only the rain and wind. "I told you so. I told you so," Tanya whispered breathlessly. "He was trying to break in. Maybe he just stumbled, lost his balance." Karina tried to find a rational explanation, but she didn't believe it herself. The lunge was too deliberate. He stumbled right on the door. "Karina, wake up. This is some kind of maniac." They stood for another minute, listening for any knocking or sounds. "Maybe he left," Karina suggested hopefully. "We need to check," Tanya said decisively, "but not through the door. Let's go to the living room. There's a window there that looks out onto the porch." On tiptoe, trying not to make any noise, they crept back into the living room. The television was still muttering something cheerful, creating a contrast. Tanya carefully pulled back the edge of the heavy curtain and peered out the window. The rain was pouring down. The lantern over the porch dimly illuminated the wet steps. "Well?" Karina whispered, hesitating to approach. Tanya abruptly pulled her hand away from the curtain. Her eyes widened in horror. He's there," she breathed. "He hasn't left. He's just standing under the lantern and watching. Looking here." Karina felt an icy chill run down her spine. She forced herself to go to the window and peered out too. The man in the bandages was indeed standing in the same place, under the narrow slit of the lantern. His head was slightly turned toward the living room window. The rain in the distance made it difficult to tell for sure, but the dark slit where his eyes should be seemed to be aimed straight at them. He didn't move, just stood there like a creepy, wet statue, patiently waiting for something. "God, what does he want?" Karina whispered, feeling nausea from fear rising in her throat. "I don't know," Tanya answered. Her voice was tense, quiet. "But we won't let him in, and we have to do something." "Call," Karina suggested. "Let's try again." They rushed to the landline phone standing on the table in the corner. Karina grabbed the receiver. Long, monotonous beeps. There was no connection. "Damn. The storm must have damaged the line." Karina hung up the phone in despair. "Mobile. My mobile." Tanya began frantically rummaging through the pockets of her jeans, then over the sofa. "Where is it? I took it with me." Finally she found the phone, lying between the sofa cushions. The screen lit up, showing no network signal. "No, not here either." Panic was evident in Tanya's voice. "Do you have reception?" Karina checked her phone. Also no signal. The tower is probably far away. And in this weather, they found themselves cut off from the world in an old house in the middle of a raging storm with an unknown, frightening man standing under the windows and watching them. What to do? Karina wrapped his arms around himself, trying to stop shaking. "Quiet." Tanya put her finger to her lips. "The main thing is not to panic. He's outside. We're inside. The door is locked. The windows. We need to check the windows." They quickly walked around the first floor, checking all the windows. They were all tightly closed. This was somewhat reassuring. "He's unlikely to climb to the second floor," Tanya said, trying to think rationally. "The windows are high up, and it's slippery from the rain. And if he goes around the house, try the back door," Karina suggested. There was indeed another door in the kitchen, leading to the internal courtyard. They hurried to the kitchen. The back door was also locked with a key, and an additional bolt. They returned to the living room, hesitant to approach the window again, and sat down on the sofa, huddled close to each other. The comedy on the screen had long since ended, replaced by some late-night show. The sound was turned off, leaving only the image. Time dragged on slowly for the tormentor. The wind didn't subside. The rain pounded the roof. Every rustle outside the window made them flinch. "Do you think he's still there?" After a while, Karina asked in a whisper. "I don't know," Tanya answered just as quietly. "And I don't want to find out." Suddenly, a new sound was heard. Not a drain. It was a scraping. A quiet, intermittent scraping on the glass of the living room window, from which they had recently looked out. The friends froze, afraid to breathe. The scraping repeated itself. This time it was a little louder, more insistent, as if someone were dragging something hard across the wet glass. "He's at the window," Karina babbled, horror in her eyes. Tanya slowly turned her head. The curtain was drawn, but through the gap between the halves something dark could be seen swaying outside. And then the scraping again. "What's he doing?" Tanya whispered. Suddenly, the scraping stopped. Silence fell, even more oppressive than the previous sounds. The friends sat motionless, listening to Boria's noise. They tried to catch any sign that the danger had passed, or on the contrary, had approached. And then the lights went out. Complete, absolute darkness enveloped the house. The television went out. The dim light from the street lamp, filtering through the curtains, disappeared. Apparently the power had gone out in the entire neighborhood. Only sounds remained. The blowing of the wind, the patter of the rain, and their own ragged breathing. No. Karina, panicked, clung to Tanya's arm. Quiet, quiet, Tanya hissed, though her own voice trembled. It was just a storm, a short circuit. But the darkness intensified their fear. Now they couldn't see what was happening outside the window. The house, which had seemed like a fortress, had turned into a dark trap. And in this darkness, right outside the living room window, a dull thud was heard. Then another, as if someone was banging, not hard but persistently, on something hard at the window. He's trying to break the glass, Tanya guessed. Horror gripped her in an icy grip. She had to run upstairs. Karina jumped up, pulling Tanya with her. Stumbling in the darkness, bumping into furniture, they rushed from the living room into the hallway to the stairs, leading to the second floor. From behind, from the living room, came the sound of breaking glass, a sharp ringing crack that was drowned out by the roar of the storm. Faster, Tanya shouted. They ran up the stairs, taking them two at a time. It was just as dark upstairs. Karina knew her house by heart, and dragged Tanya to her bedroom, the farthest room at the end of the hallway. Running inside, Karina slammed the door and frantically fumbled for the deadbolt. The click of the bolt seemed deafeningly loud in the silence. Barricade it, Tanya breathed. They needed to move something toward the door. In the darkness, they began groping, bumping into each other, until they found a heavy chair standing by the window. Together, panting and straining with all their strength, they dragged it to the door, then added a small chest of drawers. It was a flimsy barricade, but it at least offered some illusion of protection. When they finished, they huddled in the longest corner of the room, sitting on the floor with their backs pressed against the cold wall, listening. Sounds drifted from below, vague rustlings, the creaking of floorboards. Someone entered the house. Someone was moving slowly and uncertainly in the darkness of the first floor. He's looking for us, Karina whispered, covering her face with her hands. Tears streamed down her cheeks. Quiet, Tanya hugged her friend by the shoulders. She was scared herself, but she understood that panic would destroy them. He doesn't know where we are. There are many rooms here. The house was relatively quiet, except for the storm outside. It meant that the uninvited D was hiding, or listening, or slowly, methodically searching room after room. Suddenly they heard the creaking of the stairs, a slow, heavy creak. Someone was climbing to the second floor. Step. Pause. Another step. Creak. The friends froze, afraid to make a sound. The creaks came closer, growing louder. There he was already on the second floor landing. Quiet. Shuffling footsteps along the corridor. Shark. Shark. The footsteps stopped just outside their bedroom door. Karina covered her mouth with her hand to keep from screaming. Tanya felt her heart pounding wildly, echoing the roaring in her ears. An excruciating silence fell. It seemed like an eternity. They heard only his own breathing and the wind outside the window. Then the doorknob slowly turned with a creak. It jerked once, twice, encountering resistance from the latch. Then there was a dull push at the door. The barricade of chairs and dressers shifted slightly. Another push. Harder. The chair moved a few centimeters. Whoever was behind the door had no intention of leaving. They knew they were there. The pushes grew stronger and more rhythmic. Impact, impact, impact. The wooden door groaned and creaked. The chair and dresser slowly gave way, sliding along the smooth parquet. A narrow gap appeared between the door and the frame. He's going to come in now, Karina croaked in panic. Tanya frantically looked around in the darkness, trying to make out anything she could use for defense. Her hand came across something hard and heavy on the wall. A statue. A heavy bronze statue of a horse. The one Karina had been given for her birthday. Tanya grabbed it. The cold metal brought her back to her senses a little. Karine, listen. When he comes in, I'll try to hit him. And you run. Run to the window. Open it and call for help. Scream as loud as you can. Maybe someone will hear you when the storm dies down a bit. No, I won't leave you. Karina clung to it. Do as I say. Tanya's voice became firm. This is our only chance. Run. At that moment there was a deafening crash. The door swung inward, throwing the chair and chest of drawers aside. A tall figure, completely wrapped in bandages, stood in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the even darker corridor. She was clutching something long and dull gleaming in her hand. A shard of window glass. The figure stepped slowly into the room. Sharp. Shark. Shark. Tanya jumped to his feet, holding the heavy statuette in front of him. Stay away, she screamed. Her voice broke. The bandaged man stopped, tilting his head slightly, as if listening or examining her in the darkness. That same indistinct gurgling sound came from under the bandages again. Now it sounded threatening. Run! Karina! Now! Tanya screamed and swinging with all her might, lunged at the figure. She aimed the statuette at the bandaged head. The blow landed somewhere near the shoulder. There was a dull sound, like someone hitting a sack of cotton wool. The figure swayed slightly, but didn't fall, and then a bandaged hand with a shard of glass darted forward. Tanya felt a sharp, searing pain in her shoulder and screamed. The figurine fell from her hands and rolled with a dull thud. The man in bandages slowly advanced toward her. Tanya retreated until her back hit the wall next to the window. She felt something warm and sticky running down her hand. Her heart sank with horror. This was it. The end. Suddenly she heard Karina scream. Not a scream of horror but a furious, desperate wail. Karina hadn't run away. She was standing by the window that Nastia had managed to push open, and in her hands was a table lamp with a heavy base. "Leave her!" Karina screamed and brought the lamp down on the head of the bandaged man. There was a strange wet crunch. The figure staggered, then slowly, like a felled tree, began to slump onto the floor. The head lolled unnaturally to one side. Part of the bandages on the head had come undone by the blow, revealing flesh. The girls froze, staring at the fallen body, their eyes wide with horror and disgust. There was nothing beneath the unwound bandages, no skin, no bones, only tightly packed damp earth and some kind of roots, intertwined like a horrific parody of human flesh. Splinters of rotten wood protruded from the head wound. A sliver of black earth, smelling of mold and the grave, spilled out. The man in the bandages wasn't human. It was something else, something terrifying. The friends stared at the motionless body, unable to utter a word. Then Karin slowly lowered the lamp, shaking. Tanya slid down the wall, clutching her wounded arm. They sat in the corner of the bedroom until dawn, not daring to approach the body or leave the room. The storm outside gradually died down. When the first gray rays of sun penetrated the room, they illuminated a terrifying scene. An open window, overturned furniture, a dark red stain on the floor where Tanya had sat, and a motionless figure in the center of the room, earth pouring out from under his bandages. When the light finally faded and the fear receded a little, giving way to shock and fatigue, they decided to go outside. The phone still didn't work. They left the house through the back door, without looking back, and walked along the washed-out road to the neighbors. About a kilometer away, the police, who arrived later, found signs of a struggle in the house. A broken window, and red stains in the bedroom. But the bandaged body was still gone. All that remained on the floor were dirty, soaked bandages and a pile of damp earth with entangled roots. It quickly dried in the morning sun, turning to dust. No one could explain what happened that night. The police blamed it on a robber, who was perhaps wounded and escaped, and the strange evidence on the overactive imaginations of the terrified girls. But Tanya and Karina knew the truth. They knew they had encountered something inexplicable, something terrifying. And every time a thunderstorm began, they recalled that night, the quiet shuffling steps in the hallway, and the empty earthen flesh beneath the dirty bandages. A memory that still made their blood run cold years later. And from then on they always locked their doors, especially in bad weather.